You don't like the way we pay our fighters? Too fucking bad. Go start another MMA organization and you go fucking figure out how to do it. And you can pay them $10 million a fight, $30 million a fight, whatever you want to do.
All right, so after Dana White dropped some seriously fiery remarks about UFC fighters, the light heavyweight division didn't waste any time making their move. These guys were absolutely furious and fed up, so they united with a massive announcement that's bound to shake the UFC to its very core. They're jumping ship. But honestly, if you think that's shocking, just wait until you hear what they're planning to do next.
Most of the guys who are doing the absolute worst are not in a position that they could say publicly, I have a second job, I'm borrowing money from my parents.
Right.
I know so many fighters that are living in the Jackson's MMA gym because they can't afford to have their own apartment. And they're UFC fighters.
So let's break this whole situation down and look at the real breaking point. Fighters from across multiple divisions are now standing up, speaking out, and making one thing crystal clear. If the UFC won't pay them what they're actually worth, they'll simply find someone else who will. The cracks in this system have been visible for years, but recently, those cracks have turned into massive chasms. And get this, the most shocking revelation came from an unlikely source, the legend Jon Jones himself. He started speaking out about the truly dire financial situations many UFC fighters are facing. Picture this, you have professional athletes at the absolute highest level of their sport, competing in front of millions of fans, yet they're literally living in their gym because they can't even afford an apartment. Jones did not mince words when he painted this incredibly grim reality.
And if I have to have a bad relationship with Dana, sit out for 2 years, 3 years, to bring light to what's happening.
Seriously, let that sink in for just a moment. We're talking about UFC fighters here, athletes who've reached the absolute pinnacle of mixed martial arts, yet they're borrowing money from their own parents, and believe it or not, living in gyms. It's a reality that would be shocking in any professional sport, but in an organization that's generating approximately $1.4 billion in revenue in 2020. But Jones actually went even further, touching on something much deeper. The idea that some injustices are truly worth sacrificing everything for.
Light to what's happening, then these are the things that people remember you for more than winning belts. The guy stood for the younger fighters.
His point was direct. Let's not sit out for 2 years to bring...
We offered Francis a deal that would have made him the highest paid heavyweight in the history of the company. More than Lesnar, more than anybody.
This wasn't just idle talk. It's a philosophy that's actually spreading like wildfire across the entire UFC roster. Fighters are truly starting to realize that their legacy might not be defined by championship gold, but by whether they stood up for change when it mattered the most. Because, let's be real, the most powerful statement any fighter can make isn't delivered in some press conference. It's made with their feet, literally walking right out the door. And honestly, nobody's exit sent shockwaves through the MMA world quite like Francis Ngannou's departure. The former heavyweight champion, known for his devastating knockout power and inspiring rags-to-riches story from Cameroon, didn't just leave, he absolutely torched the bridge on his way out. Dana White even claimed he offered Ngannou a deal that would have made him the highest-paid heavyweight in UFC history. More than Brock Lesnar, more than anyone.
I think Francis is in a place right now where he doesn't want to take a lot of risk. Feels like he's in a good position where he could fight lesser opponents and make more money. So we're gonna let him do.
But here's where the narrative actually gets really interesting. White's explanation for Ngannou's departure ended up revealing way more about the UFC's core philosophy than he probably ever intended.
When you're talking about pay-per-view, then you're negotiating pay-per-view, and then you see number like 1.25 pay-buys and stuff like that, and the pay-per-view is going from $60 to $80 in the past 5 years, and you realize that the 0.25 that is on top of it is out of the $20 that's been added on. I'm like, come on, man. It's not my first pay-per-view contract.
Honestly, that dismissive tone speaks volumes. But Ngannou had his own perspective on why he walked away. And it certainly wasn't about taking easy fights. For him, it was about respect, about feeling valued, and ultimately, about a pay structure that simply didn't make any sense. Just listen to his frustration.
It wasn't even about the money. even how he was structured, even how he was, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. You know, I went home and I was so, I don't know, frustrated or just...
The mathematical breakdown of this is absolutely damning.
Pay-per-view prices soar by $20 for fans, yet the fighter's cut increases by a measly quarter of that. Seriously. It's the kind of negotiation that leaves you feeling completely insulted rather than truly valued. Ngannou himself continued by saying,
with boxing too, that all guys are overpaid. And every time they put on a fight, it's a going out of business sale.
and here's the absolute kicker. Ngannou's gamble paid off spectacularly. His bold move to the PFL, followed by those massive, high-profile boxing matches against legends like Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, proved his point in the most definitive way possible. He actually earned more in a single night than he did in his entire UFC tenure. Suddenly, the idea of getting your money elsewhere wasn't just a threat, it became a clear blueprint for others. But Ngannou's departure was truly just the beginning. Across the entire UFC roster, fighters are now finding their voices, and they are absolutely not holding back. Take Justin Gaethje, the fan-favorite lightweight known for his all-out brawls. He openly expressed frustration in mid-2025, feeling completely underappreciated by the UFC. After consistently delivering highlight reel performances and taking massive damage, he stated he was done doing cheaper steak for the promotion without proper recognition or compensation that truly matched his risks. Gaethje's complaints weren't just about paychecks, they touched on something much deeper, something more personal. It's about the emotional drain of pouring everything into fights, of sacrificing your health and your future, only to feel sidelined when it comes to genuine opportunities and rewards. His narrative is a classic case of burnout, where even a fighter who's headlined major events and taken significant damage questions why the UFC doesn't reciprocate. Then there's Askarov, a talented flyweight who left the UFC in 2025 after the promotion refused to improve his contract, despite his strong record with only one loss to a dominant champion. Askarov made the no-brainer decision to return to his home country for better paying opportunities. His exit really highlighted how the UFC's rigid stance on negotiations can push skilled athletes away, especially those from international backgrounds facing additional hurdles like visas and taxes. Even more telling is the heartbreaking story of Alex Pereira's situation. The light heavyweight kingpin, who had a meteoric rise from kickboxing to UFC stardom, shared a truly disheartening message in 2025 after hearing something, likely related to pay or treatment, that amplified his existing thoughts of retirement. Pereira, who's never been one to publicly badmouth the UFC, actually admitted the news left him questioning his entire future in the sport. When even champions at the pinnacle feel this way, you know something is fundamentally broken. But to truly understand why these fighters are reaching their breaking points, we need to examine the system that created this crisis in the first place. The very system that often breaks fighters. So to really grasp why fighters are fleeing, we need to examine the harsh financial reality they're forced to face. The UFC operates under a compensation framework that is fundamentally different from traditional sports leagues, and let me tell you, it's not in a good way. Unlike the NFL or NBA, where athletes are employees with collective bargaining agreements ensuring around 50% revenue sharing, UFC fighters are classified as independent contractors. This seemingly technical distinction has massive implications. The UFC's revenue share for fighters hovers between a paltry 16% and 20% of the organization's total earnings. Let me put that into shocking perspective. In 2024, the UFC generated approximately $1.4 billion in revenue, with fighters collectively receiving an estimated 20. That translates to about 16 and 18% of the pie. Now you might be thinking, that's still a lot of money, but when you divide that amongst 600 plus fighters on the roster, the reality becomes incredibly stark. For entry-level fighters in 2025, contracts started around $14,000 to show and $14,000 to win, up from previous minimums of $12,000. That means if you lose, you walk away with just $14,000 before taxes, management fees, which are typically 10 to 20%, training costs, and all sorts of other expenses. Let's do some quick math here. After a 20% management cut, you're already down to just 11. Factor in training camp costs, coaches, sparring partners, nutritionists, medical care, and that can easily add up to another. Suddenly, that professional athlete paycheck looks a whole lot more like poverty wages. Shockingly, 43% of UFC fighters earn less than $45,000 annually before expenses, with a median salary of that's barely above living wages in high-cost areas like Las Vegas or California, where many of them train. And Dana White, the UFC's president, has his own philosophy about fighter pay, and he's certainly not shy about defending it. His arguments reveal a very particular worldview about how combat sports should actually operate. Just listen to his reasoning.
We'll see you in 3 years. You can't build a league like that. You can't build a sport. You can't have 750 fighters under contract, making money, feeding their families every year with that kind of mentality. It doesn't work.
White's reasoning, you know what I mean? We're just trying to get as much money as we can from you guys and then we're out of here.
But what we did is we built a business model where they share. If you're the champion, you share in the pay-per-view revenue. If you're the guy headlining the card, or there's been some special occasions where we know you're bringing in the money too, that you're a big draw. So you two get to share in the pay-per-view revenue.
White always positions the UFC as the responsible steward of MMA, claiming they're building something sustainable rather than just burning bright and fast like boxing often does. But there's a huge irony here. He criticizes boxing's model, while many UFC fighters actually see boxing as their ultimate escape route to much better pay. When asked about the pay scale, White tried to explain it by saying,
the fighters managed to get you to up the bonuses. Do you think there's an argument that maybe you should just up them to...
I think tonight showed that we should not, no. Upping them doesn't change anything. It doesn't make anybody fight any harder. It doesn't change anything. I'm not doing this again.
But here's the fundamental problem with that entire model. It creates a massive wealth gap between the top 1% of fighters and literally everyone else. And even for those top fighters, the UFC's shift away from traditional PPV models is a concern. With their 2025 announcement of a colossal 7-year, $7.7 billion media rights deal with Paramount, it effectively ends the ESPN Plus PPV structure, replacing it with streaming-inclusive broadcasting. While this could boost overall revenues to over $1.1 billion annually, it also might significantly reduce individual fighter leverage for those crucial PPV bonuses. White's most revealing moment, though, came after fighters actually convinced him to raise performance bonuses, only for the very next event to feature 7 straight decisions. His reaction was absolutely visceral and completely unfiltered.
Ever. Today was the last day that I'm doing that. Yeah. Not saying that in the future the bonuses couldn't get up, but I'm not gonna be at a press conference and say 200, 300, fucking never again.
His commitment to that stance was absolutely unwavering.
Every time somebody comes out and says, oh, you don't pay your fighters, you don't pay your fighters. I could come out and do this I'm not. I don't give a shit. You don't like the way we pay our fighters? Too fucking bad. Go start another MMA organization and you go fucking figure out how to do it.
And when he's confronted about the broader criticism of fighter pay, White's response is always essentially the same. Take it or leave it. No compromises.
I think the way that the business is set up, like they pay you whatever they want to pay you. They let you pretend that you're negotiating while you're not negotiating, because either way, you're still in the contract.
But perhaps the most damning critique of the UFC's system comes from those who've actually lived it. Francis Ngannou didn't just leave the promotion. He completely pulled back the curtain on how the negotiation process actually works, or more accurately, how it doesn't work. In a truly revealing conversation, Ngannou explained the pervasive illusion of negotiation that fighters are constantly forced to face.
Let's say 40 months contract, by 20 months, they will come to negotiate. A little bit more money if you say yes, yeah. Then they are giving you a new 40 months, which means they start over because of the money that they added. But because by that time, your value is like maybe 2 or 3 times what they are offering.
This is exactly where that independent contractor classification becomes a cage rather than true freedom. Ngannou himself broke down the insidious cycle like this.
I mean, you're kind of like broke, you're struggling, and then you're seeing your next fight, okay, 50,000, you have to pay this and pay that and get away with maybe 20,000, and you have to pay your loan and all the stuff, and they have a new contract, 100,000. It's really hard to turn that down when you're in that position.
And here's where it gets truly exploitative. Imagine you're a fighter, literally struggling to make ends meet. You're about to get $50,000 for your next fight, money you desperately, absolutely need. Then the UFC swoops in and offers you a new contract with a $100,000 per fight. But there's a catch. It completely resets your entire deal. Ngannou vividly described this exact trap.
Okay, so this is the thing. Because you were struggling, you were expecting your fight for the $50,000, which is what a lot of people in the UFC they do, and even for less than that, and they have even borrow money for finance their training camp or whatever. So they are expecting that money to pay back. And if you tell this guy to go on strike, why he has a $50,000 coming up who can like save him from the guillotine, like release his neck a little bit.
This system intentionally keeps fighters in constant financial precarity, so they literally can't afford to genuinely negotiate. So, the obvious question is, why don't fighters just strike? Why don't they band together and simply refuse to fight until things actually change? Well, the answer reveals another deeply embedded layer of the UFC's control. When this was suggested to Ngannou, his response was incredibly illuminating.
Not because the UFC has the power to cut you. I'm going on strike. Oh, really? You're doing that?
The UFC doesn't just control a fighter's present. They also control their immediate future. Miss a fight, and you don't just lose that payday, you could potentially lose your entire spot on the roster.
Then you don't even have that 50,000 anymore. What next?
Ngannou painted the bleak reality.
So a lot of fighters, they don't want to compromise that because that's only what they get. You know, they don't have a saving. They live day by day, fight by fight. And that's why, like, when they don't fight, they go dry.
His point was clear. You're out at the right moment. No, you're doing that, you're out now.
I don't know. I mean, if you got 48% as the EBITDA, give or take, their margins are 35 to 50%. You got the margins to be able to afford to.
If they get what? The margin of
the
what?
margins
The
are EBITDA. Their EBITDA margins are very high. They make They make a lot of profit.
Who?
Very profitable. UFC.
You say how much?
48% is the number we saw when we looked at our reports.
48%?
48%.
Unionization efforts have actually failed repeatedly, with attempts like Project Spearhead fizzling out largely due to a very real fear of retaliation. Fighters like Leslie Smith have been vocal pioneers, pushing tirelessly for change, only to face severe consequences. For example, being cut from the roster right amidst organizing talks. With the doors to change seemingly locked from within the UFC, fighters are increasingly looking outside its walls. And what they're discovering is truly changing everything, where the money really is. If fighters can't change the UFC from within, they're realizing they can absolutely change their situation by simply leaving. And increasingly, they're finding that life outside the UFC can be far more lucrative and much less constraining. The Professional Fighters League, or PFL, has expertly positioned itself as a fighter-friendly alternative with its season-long tournament format. This promises clear paths to big payouts, structured million-dollar prizes for winners, which creates much-needed predictability in a sport notorious for uncertainty. Rory MacDonald, a former UFC welterweight contender, made the move to PFL after feeling completely undervalued in the UFC. MacDonald spoke about how refreshing it was to be in a system where performance directly ties to rewards, without all the politics of matchmaking. While the UFC certainly boasts larger audiences, the PFL provides a clear, merit-based ladder that feels much more equitable, drawing in fighters who prioritize structure over stardom. One Championship, with its Asian roots and emphasis on traditional martial arts values, offers another compelling alternative. Here, fighters often praise the promotion's focus on athlete welfare, including better sponsorship freedoms and a true family-like atmosphere. Eddie Alvarez moved to one after his UFC stint, specifically noting the difference in contract flexibility. One allows fighters to pursue other disciplines without as many restrictions, fostering a genuine sense of empowerment. But the most lucrative escape route of all? Boxing. Francis Ngannou's incredible journey into boxing after leaving the UFC proved this point definitively. He inked deals for massive boxing paydays against icons like Tyson Fury, proving that the sweet science can offer life-altering sums without the same contractual shackles. Ngannou's success has truly inspired others. Tom Aspinall's family has even hinted at similar paths, where a single, high-profile boxing bout could easily eclipse years of UFC earning. To truly understand what fighters are fighting for, you absolutely need to see the numbers that the UFC doesn't want you to focus on. When Francis Ngannou sat down for an interview, the business breakdown of the UFC's profitability became impossible to ignore. The host actually referenced financial data showing just how incredibly profitable the UFC really is.
The margin, by the statistic that's going on now, like they make between 80 to 85%.
But Ngannou actually had an even more striking statistic to share with everyone.
So let's just say you do $1, they're keeping 48 cents.
The implication of this is absolutely staggering, with revenues approaching $1.5 billion annually and potentially even exceeding that with a new Paramount deal. The UFC's profitability margin strongly suggests there's enormous room to significantly increase fighter compensation. The host's conclusion on this was pretty straightforward.
I think the way that the business is set up, like they pay you whatever they want to pay you. They let you pretend that you're negotiating while you're not negotiating.
So those are the margins. But getting that money to the fighters isn't as simple as just asking nicely. Ngannou explained the fundamental problem like this.
Francis, are you getting more money from sponsorships than fights right now? Okay. Is it 4, 5, 10 times more? Is it 10 times more? Not.
In 2025, something truly unprecedented actually happened in UFC history. A massive $37.5 million antitrust lawsuit settlement was approved, specifically designed to compensate fighters for alleged wage suppression between 20. This wasn't just a settlement, it was a powerful legal acknowledgement that something had been fundamentally wrong with how the UFC treated its fighters. The lawsuit itself traced all the way back to 2014, when former fighters like Kung Lei and Nate Corey initially filed suit accusing the UFC of antitrust violations. These violations allegedly stemmed from practices like acquiring rival promotions and enforcing exclusive deals that effectively prevented athletes from seeking better opportunities elsewhere. Over the years, this grew into a massive class action effort, representing over 1,000 fighters who competed in UFC events during that critical period. When the settlement was finally finalized in February 2025, fighters began receiving their payments. For veterans like Eddie Alvarez, this announcement brought on some mixed emotions. He publicly saluted the attorneys and fighters for their decade-long effort, but honestly lamented that the amount still fell short of what he truly believed was deserved. About 35 fighters reportedly received more than $1 million, and around 100 got over $500,000, with these payouts described as genuinely life-changing by the attorneys involved. The settlement also introduced some operational changes. For the next 5 years, the UFC agreed to limit exclusive negotiating periods to 30 days and matching rights to 4 months, which effectively gives fighters slightly more leverage when their contracts expire. Yet, the broader impact on the sport's fundamental structure remained somewhat limited. No mandatory revenue sharing increases, no union formation, and crucially, no dismantling of the independent contractor model. So, where exactly does this leave us? The answer lies in understanding that the UFC's dominance isn't an absolute, unshakable force. It's actually sustained by fighters' acceptance of the status quo, and that acceptance is demonstrably crumbling. When Ngannou was asked if he was earning more from sponsorships than his actual fights, his answer was incredibly telling. But the crucial potential was absolutely there. The genuine possibility of building significant wealth outside the UFC's established ecosystem. This ongoing conversation represents a fundamental shift in how fighters are now thinking about their entire careers. The UFC platform can enable fighters to build powerful personal brands, but increasingly, fighters are realizing that this platform has value far beyond what the UFC pays them directly. The 2025 announcement of the colossal $7.7 billion Paramount media rights deal represents a critical juncture. Dana White, of course, promised that fighters would benefit immensely from this windfall, confidently claiming, "We don't hoard that money." However, history strongly suggests that skepticism is more than warranted. Analysts are actually predicting that while base pays may rise by about $60 million in renegotiated guarantees for top fighters, the overall fighter revenue share could actually dip to a mere. This is a nominal 33% increase in total pay, but the reality is stark. Without structural changes, without a true union, without mandatory revenue splits, and without employee classification, this fundamental imbalance will absolutely persist. But what is changing is fighters' willingness to simply accept that imbalance. Recent endorsements, like the SEAU labor union supporting the Ali Act expansion to MMA, offer genuine glimmers of hope, specifically aiming to curb the UFC's monopsony power that effectively suppresses negotiation. Additional pressures are mounting as well. Consider this: college NIL deals, offering between $100,000 for top wrestlers, are now actively diverting talent from traditional MMA pipeline. This is putting immense pressure on the UFC to adapt or risk losing the very next generation of talent. Comparisons with other sports become truly stark when you dive into the numbers. In boxing, fighters often retain a massive 60 to 80%. The NFL splits nearly 50% with its players, including vital benefits like health insurance and pensions, benefits almost entirely absent in the UFC, where fighters typically cover their own medical costs. A hypothetical unionized UFC with 50% revenue sharing could realistically yield an average annual pay of $700,000 for non-champions, tiered from $450,000 for newcomers to a staggering $1.2. But perhaps the most powerful tool fighters have isn't strikes or lawsuits, it's quite simply their feet. Every Francis Ngannou who walks away and succeeds spectacularly elsewhere sends an undeniable message. Every Justin Gaethje who speaks out boldly emboldens others. Every Tom Aspinall whose family hints at lucrative boxing opportunities reminds the UFC that their monopoly on talent isn't guaranteed forever. The announcement "we'll get our money elsewhere" isn't coming from a single division or a unified strike anymore. It's coming from individual fighters, one courageous decision at a time, slowly but surely building into a powerful movement. It's John Jones talking about standing up for younger fighters as his ultimate legacy. It's Francis Ngannou proving you can make exponentially more money outside than inside. It's Justin Gaethje saying he's done sacrificing without reciprocation. It's Alex Pereira questioning his entire future after disheartening news. The UFC built an empire on the backs of fighters who for a long time truly had nowhere else to go. But the world is rapidly changing. Powerful alternatives are emerging. Boxing beckons with massive purses. The PFL offers clear tournament structures and much clearer paths to earnings. One championship provides flexibility and crucially, fighters are learning to leverage their personal platforms for sponsorships that often dwarf their actual fight purses. The 2025 antitrust settlement provided some much-needed retroactive justice, but it doesn't guarantee future equity. That will only truly come when enough fighters realize their collective power, or when enough of them simply walk away towards demonstrably better opportunities. The UFC's $11.3 billion valuation is built entirely on fighter talent. Without fighters willing to step into that octagon, that value simply evaporates. Because one thing is becoming crystal clear: fighters are done waiting for the UFC to value them. If the UFC won't pay, they will get their money elsewhere, and they are proving every single day that elsewhere is more than willing to pay.